Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a new panel for the 𝗧cie 𝗄𝗶𝗊 Foundation Media Institute that is conducting this panel entitled Lebanese-Arab Relations in the Middle East of Shifting Geopolitical Dynamics under the project Renewing Lebanon's Political and Economic Structures. In partnership with the Public Affairs section at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, I have very interesting guests from Beirut and Washington. Starting from Beirut, 𝗔𝗀𝗶𝗊, it's a big resume, but let me just give a brief. Founder and Executive Chairman, Beirut Institute columnist, النهار العربي and the National. And Hussein 𝗔𝗀𝗶, Senior Resident, Scholar, Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington. Joyce Karam, Senior U.S. Correspondent at the National at this moment. Well, she has a new journey coming up soon. And a professor at George Washington University. Also, a dear friend, Firas Maqsad, a Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute and also Professor at George Washington University. Thanks for joining this interesting panel. Definitely, the headline is big, but there is a lot of changes in the region. But let me just start with a very simple question. How do you define the relationship of the Gulf states with Lebanon at this moment?
I thought we were starting on the regional, international, not Gulf states with Lebanon. So I'm going to leave it to one of my other colleagues because we agreed that I would not be the expert on that part of the.
Let me just.
Go ahead, please.
So let me just go to your last article then. But I'm going to try to get an answer from you on this relationship because I know you're an expert on that. But we'll see along the way. But let's talk about your last article. There's a new indication that is very important and dangerous at the same time. I did get the conclusion that Iran might put on a table a military choice against Israel. And this is a very serious development here.
So let's start with what's going on between the United States and Iran and the Europeans and Iran, and therefore consequently with the Gulf states and Iran. So there has been a sea change actually in the relationship between Europe and the US on one hand and Iran on the other. And that has happened in the last couple of weeks. It's fundamental change because you could see the Europeans saying, oh, we made a mistake. We did not read where the Iranians were going, what are they thinking? And that was really because of the involvement of Iran with the Ukrainian, on the side of Russia, in the Ukrainian war. That woke up the Europeans. The 𝗔𝗀𝗶𝗿 also went into basically a coma because of the persistence of Iran on excluding the action of the International Atomic IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, and therefore it became stuck. The fact that this relationship with the United States, between the United States and Iran, is stuck at the 𝗔𝗀𝗶𝗿, not happening. Therefore, there is no lifting of the sanctions like the Iranians were hoping. This has angered Iran. Iran is really quite furious with what's going on. Internally, obviously, it's quite upset with the situation that it cannot handle. It's gone longer than it expected. And with the Europeans going their own way, with the Americans going away from the Iranians, from the regime, they are considering, from what I'm told now, I'm not so sure whether it is an actual plan or whether it's a hot balloon that they wanted us to hear about. I mean, is Iran bluffing when it says that it's right now ready for military engagement? And I'm quoting from sources who are very close to very important Iranian policymakers in the regime in Tehran. And so they are saying this. They're saying that they are ready for military engagement, not only if provoked, but also as the preemptive strikes against Israel for the idea of destroying the infrastructure. Nowadays, they speak about destroying the infrastructure much more because there is no interest in occupying territory. So they're saying, I mean, they have a whole plan ready. And the reason for that would be to change the subject away from what's happening inside Iran and also for sort of crippling the ability of Benjamin Netanyahu in particular to strike in Tehran, in Iran beforehand. So this preemptive approach is meant to have on it, the Iranians with Hamas in Gaza, not Hezbollah in Lebanon from what I'm told, but anyway, so that they will not have the strike back. And that is the summary of it. But again, I want to repeat whether this is really the plan ready for execution, or whether Iran is bluffing so that because of its own weakness. We can analyze this and we can discuss it during
that panel. Moving to Washington, to Hussein Ibish. Mr. Hussein, I want to move this question to you. How do you find the relation between Arab Gulf states with Lebanon? This relationship has been shaking and passed through many obstacles along the way.
Sorry about that, thank you. All right, so obviously Qatar is the one Gulf Arab country that has been really engaged in Lebanon, and it remains, closely involved and putting in money in different projects and things like that. So more interesting is that the UAE does not seem to be re-engaging. The UAE is still kind of holding back, issuing things like applauding the maritime border demarcation agreement sort of with the US and therefore indirectly with Israel and things like that, but basically not doing much. It's the Saudis who have really re-engaged this year in 2022. They have restored their ambassador, sent an ambassador, 𝗷𝗶𝗽 to Beirut, and they have agreed with France and the United States to provide $20 million to Lebanon right away, and they have more plans for humanitarian aid. But I think effectively the pattern of Saudi Arabia and Lebanon is very similar to the pattern of Saudi Arabia and Iraq, which is they engage hoping to undermine Iran's role in these countries by weakening their local proxies, Iran's very allies, including Hezbollah and the Free Patriotic Movement and others who are aligned with Iran. And they get disappointed because Iran's grip on those allies is strong, and those Iranian proxies or clients have a very powerful role in those countries, and you see a similar process in Iraq. So what Saudi Arabia tends to do is engage, try to make progress, but then they lack the patience. So far, they have lacked sufficient patience, because really what is required of Saudi Arabia and France and the United States, and those who would like to see Hezbollah assume the role of a political party and stop undermining the Lebanese state, is to understand that the only alternative is the Lebanese state itself. And what building up the Lebanese state requires is taking certain short-term risks that your aid might be co-opted and you might end up suspecting that...
Mr. Hussein, we're going to go into details. I just want to stop you here for a second and go to...
That's my take on it.
Yeah, no, actually, when I expand on what you said, I just wanted to ask Firas Maqsad. So do you think that the Gulf countries are taking a different approach with Lebanon?
First, thanks for hosting us, and hello to all the friends and colleagues who are part of this very interesting discussion. I mean, the first point I would make is that there really isn't sort of a united Gulf approach towards Lebanon. There are various policies, as Hussein alluded to. Qatar is on one end of the spectrum, where Qatar continues to be engaged and interested, opportunistic, looking for opportunities maybe in the Eastern Mediterranean in relation to gas. But on the other opposite side of the spectrum is the UAE, where it has not re-engaged in Lebanon, has not sent back an ambassador to Lebanon, despite the Kuwaiti initiative. And somewhere in the middle of that spectrum...
So why so? We didn't get yet a clear answer why the UAE didn't establish that relationship with Lebanon like Saudi Arabia and other countries.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to shed some light on that. I mean, I was just discussing this issue yesterday with a senior official from the UAE in preparation for our discussion, and I was told that, listen, it's not that we've written off Lebanon. It's just that Lebanon goes into the cost-benefit equation. That as we were discussing our policy options, we ask what are the expected returns on such engagement or such policies. And the answer for the Emiratis as it relates to Lebanon continues to be very little. There's little that Lebanon can do in terms of promoting UAE interest in the region as they see it. And so therefore, they've been on the opposite side of the spectrum as the UAE. Now, the most interesting of all these Gulf states, obviously, is Saudi Arabia. It's the elephant in the room for its traditional role. And here, I mean, allow me to make a second one. The first point being that there is sort of no selective Gulf approach to Lebanon, although we might want to simplify it and think of it that way. It's just not accurate. The second point is that the relationship is not just a reflection of what Lebanon is or is not doing. I mean, there's been a lot of focus, and rightfully so, I would think, about sort of the role of Hezbollah, the role of exporting drugs and the Captagon trade, flooding the Gulf markets. The media.
But the prime minister took serious measures to limit these actions.
Can I just add something to what Firas and Hussein said? I think there is one element, it's the bottom line. I think it's a decision, a very conscious decision that the UAE has taken to give the lead to Saudi Arabia on the issue of Lebanon. Bottom line.
Is that decision made by Saudi Arabia or by UAE?
The UAE.
They're two different things, Raghida.
I just said
Who's taking the lead here?
I just said
Saudi Arabia makes that decision, not the UAE, correct?
The UAE has taken the decision that it is right now the time for them to back Saudi Arabia in taking the lead. This is a decision by the UAE. The Saudis did not force them. Basically, it is now most of the Gulf, they have left the leadership to Saudi Arabia. And I wouldn't be surprised if after this World Cup and the actions taken by the Emir of Qatar in embracing the flag of Saudi Arabia and
vice versa.
That they too are going to be very, very much on the road of improving relations, the Qataris and the Saudis, but the Saudis will stay in the lead when it comes to Lebanon with the consent of the Gulf states.
So I want to ask you, Firas, I want to ask you that. So basically, there is a shift also of the approach I was trying to mention earlier. So basically, now, do you think the Saudis are more interested to establish a relationship with political actors in Lebanon instead of Lebanon as a whole, as we saw in the last electoral election, the parliamentary election back in May 2022?
Well, I mean, another point that I was trying to make, the second point that I was trying to make, is that it's not only the relationship between Lebanon and Saudi Arabia, or the Gulf more broadly, is not only a function of what Lebanon is or is not doing. Whether it's Hezbollah or the media attacks, the Captagon that's being exported and flooded into Gulf markets, it's also a function of the changing reality and the generational change in the Gulf. The Gulf simply just does not see the region. It does not see Lebanon the way that it used to. Lebanon's priority in terms of strategic priority is just no longer where it used to be for Gulf states. But you asked me about Saudi Arabia, so I'm going to answer you about Saudi Arabia. I mean, Saudi officials, I think, don't like it when I say this. But, I often like to point out to them when I am in Riyadh that although they complain quite often about American isolationism and an American retreat from the region, Saudi Arabia itself has kind of adopted a policy that is minimalist in its involvement in various places outside of its borders. With the exception of, obviously, Yemen, which they feel is the soft underbelly of the kingdom, and Iraq, with which they share their longest land border, Saudis have really refocused their policy into a domestic one, where they don't want to commit the mistakes that they see that the Iranians are committing, which is imperial overreach. They are rebuilding and restructuring and reforming internally. And so when you ask about sort of what is Saudi foreign policy and what is the strategy and where does Lebanon fit in that strategy, the answer is pretty much sort of one of status quo and one that's focused on regional stability, one that allows for Vision 2030 and the tremendous change that's taking place in the kingdom to move forward. The interest in Lebanon comes a very distant second and third.
Firas, so let's try to make this roundtable goes quickly, and we go back and expand on your opinions. Joyce, do you agree with the rest of the panelists here that
yeah, go ahead.
that the UAE gave Uzbek and Saudi Arabia gave not that kind of permission, but I mean, not to be involved so much, left the lead for Saudi Arabia. All that it was only a policy from KSA to take that lead.
Well, first, great to be with you. Great to be with, to see Raghida. It's been a while to be with Firas and Hussein, and thanks to the 𝗓𝗍𝗏 Foundation for hosting us. It's a very important discussion. On the big questions, I do agree that the UAE delegates the relationship to Saudi Arabia. But there are some variations in the policy. We saw the UAE welcoming, for example, the Maritime deal with Israel much earlier than Saudi. We see more UAE engagement, for example, in South Lebanon and other areas, in Tripoli, where Saudi is still, taking the back seat. Somehow, I do agree with Hussein that yes, of course, Saudi looks more engaged by returning the ambassador, by holding meetings. But the problem for Saudi Arabia today is still the same. That is the problem in 2005 and 2006. Saudi Arabia has not been able to find a partner in Lebanon in the caliber and the prominence of Rafiq Hariri. Saad al-Hariri did not fill this void. Others have stepped in to become prime minister, have had somewhat ups and downs with the kingdom, and that's a major challenge for Saudi, because absent of having a reliable, credible partner as prime minister, they're not ready to go all in, and that's a negative, double negative.
But in Lebanon, we have the sense since the MBS becoming powerful, there is a lot of shifting from the beginning, not just like recently. Like Prime Minister Hariri was in a game, and he was supported by the Saudis, but not fully supported by the Saudis at the same time. So it seems like KSA had enough from Lebanon.
Can we move forward,
what do you
though,
think?
rather than stop at what had happened with Saad al-Hariri and the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Saad al-Hariri? Let us really just go forward right now and understand, I would let,
but don't we have to look at the past?
Yeah, and we don't really always have to, no, because it's a different story right now. Things have changed. I'll let Joyce finish her point, and then I would like to come in on this. But let's just go forward. What do they want now? Well, never mind what has happened.
No. Yeah, this is going to be the second round of
Let Joyce finish.
Joyce.
And then the point I want to stress is we are unfortunately in a lose-lose paradigm. It's bad for Saudi not to be engaged in Lebanon. It's bad for Lebanon not to have Saudi engagement and investments in Beirut. I mean, we've gone from 2016, where the Gulf investment in Lebanon was 76%. To almost, being nothing today. So this is a very critical relationship that needs to be restored. And I guess we will debate some ideas here and recommendations, but I'm afraid we are in a negative spiral when it comes to that relationship.
Raghida, also we cannot ignore the relationship between Saudi Arabia and USA has been critical lately, especially when the US asked to hide the production of oil, and we know the answer of the Saudis, and they're taken aside along with Russia in the last war now with Ukraine.
They didn't take the side of Russia. That's a very incorrect statement, because we cannot just let that pass. The Saudis did not take a position with Russia against the West in the Ukraine war. No, in fact, they condemned. Many of the Gulf states condemned the Russian intervention.
This is the feeling in Biden's administration.
No, this is a fact. This is a vote in this.
Well, I'm saying
this is a vote. This is a vote in the General Assembly of the United Nations. It's not about a feeling, but about the feeling. I want to walk you through it.
I'm just telling you what's the impression.
Okay, no. Facts are more important than the impression. So what I want to tell you is the following. What happened 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, both the Saudis and the administration walked back from the escalation. They both walked it back. walked it back. The Saudis went ahead with the condemnation, clarifying that. I think in December we're going to see Saudi action with the OPEC plus action, the oil related. And the administration did two things. One of them is to do nothing, which is to say there was escalation in the Congress, and they had to take a position. But then they sent messages to the Saudis that no, we spoke maybe a bit too roughly, but we will not review the bilateral relationship. So that was that. And from there, at that time on, a lot has happened. Brett McGurk, who is the #1, I suppose, official involved in the Middle East in the White House, he went to Manama Dialogue, where I was just last week, and his message was that, I mean, he said it even clearly, that they thwarted together a potential attack by Iran against Saudi Arabia. The whole message by the whole American team, never mind the Europeans, we'll get back to them, but the American team, which was the commander of the Central Command, and it was the deputy,
Secretary of Defense.
Okay, and of course Brett McGurk. The whole message to the Gulf was this: listen, we're here to stay. And don't make a mistake and go choosing coalitions with Russia, or which is in past tense already, or with China, which is not going to be in your interest. In fact, we are so invested security-wise here in this region that it will be foolish of you, in effect, my words, not theirs, to shift away from the US now. It is the first time that I hear the Europeans and the Americans coming to the Gulf and saying that, in effect, we need you for security relationship. It is a reversal. In the past, it was the Gulf states who were going to the US and Europe saying, please don't leave us, I need you. Now,
it's mature.
It's a very interesting dynamic in the relationship. And that...
Can I add something to that?
Yes.
You're exactly right.
Go ahead, Hussein. Let's hear your take on this.
Well, I'd like to give you an example of it, right? So the US is developing a digital mission, real-time surveillance system with drones, aerial drones, which are old, underwater drones, which are about 10 years old, and surface drones, unmanned surface vehicles on the water, which is 15 months old technology. And by the end of the summer of 2023, there are going to be 100 surface drones, unmanned surface vehicles, patrolling the waters of the Gulf.
Yes.
Following everything, 20% American, 80% local, and some British. So this is really, a long-term...
It's a game changer, yes.
It's a game changer. It's a game changer.
And if you add to...
I think so. I mean,
Joyce?
Ramida put it... Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joyce. I'm listening.
I think Ramida put it very concisely. Brett McGurk is in charge of this fight. It's not the State Department. It's not the Pentagon.
That's right.
This is the guy who's doing the day-to-day meetings, the calls to recalibrate the relationship. And following the September decision, there has been back channel communications between Riyadh and Washington, and there is a realization, given the threats that Iran poses to Saudi Arabia, and given the security balance in the Gulf, there is no substitute for American guarantees now. That China cannot fill in that void. Russia cannot fill in that void. I don't know what will happen in December at the OPEC.
What would you expect? What would you expect would happen at the OPEC with all these factors that are taking place at this moment?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Hussein, it's a question.
I would like to jump in, if that's okay. I would like to add to the conversation in relation to the U.S.-Saudi Gulf relations. I mean, listen, the sea change in here, and I feel like the Gulf states have really been fortunate, was that Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That just highlighted everything that those of us who are part of this discussion have been saying for a number of years now, at least since President Obama announced his quote-unquote pivot to Asia, which is you cannot leave the Middle East. The Middle East is just too important for the global economy too important in terms of global shipping and strategic choke points. There is no way you could see the Middle East away to your competing global hegemons or powers like China and Russia, which were increasingly making inroads, and particularly the Russians in the wake of the Arab uprisings in 2011. So I think the Ukraine war really brought this home to many in Washington, and even as sort of Raghida and others were kind of making very clearly here, even those in the administration who are not necessarily favorable, well, the politics is not favorable on the Democratic side here of a stronger relationship to Saudi Arabia, but I think that very much has settled in now. Whether it's
Firas, what happened? I can.
If I may just sort of make that
Sure.
point and finish it, which is that doesn't necessarily translate into a change going back to what things used to be in the good old days, as many see them. In Pax Americana of the 90s. Everybody here travels often and confers with Gulf leaders and understand that there's a renewed sense of confidence in this new generations, whether it's in Abu Dhabi or Riyadh or otherwise. And they don't feel like they have to pick and choose. As Washington White House increasingly tells them, well, we're not happy with what you're doing with the Chinese, and well, we need you to do this with the Russians. Clearly, you hear from Riyadh and Abu Dhabi saying, well, we're not going to take sides. And in fact, the days, I've been told this a number of times by senior officials, the days of phone calls from Washington tell us what to do.
It's over.
Behind it. We're not going there. So it's great to see this improvement.
Hussein shaking his head. Let me just get his quick view. Do you think these days are over, that the U.S. will command these countries to how to act?
Here's the difference. The difference is, in the past, the emphasis is exactly what Raghida was saying. The difference was that in the past, the Gulf countries, the relationship was structured on the Gulf countries needing the U.S. for protecting them from outside threats. Now, it's a partnership to maintain security and stability. Firas mentioned the choke points. What are they? Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb, and the Strait of Hormuz. These are crucial to the world. And one of the biggest points of leverage the United States has over China is 30% of China's energy comes from the Gulf. And the United States, with its local partners, absolutely dominates those waters. And as I mentioned before, is developing these long-term mapping security systems that really creates a very secure partnership.
Before I go back to Joyce, I just want to ask you.
Yes.
Just I want to give you plenty of time. But quickly, I just want to, because we're shaking her head as well. We need to know what to expect in the next OPEC meeting.
No, of course, there's going to be a different situation
in
the relationship. No, it's going to be a much better picture between the Saudi Arabia leadership of the OPEC Plus and both Europe and the US. It's going to be different, because the relationship changed, and the relationship changed over the last 3-4 weeks for a couple of major reasons. We already mentioned the most important one, which is Iran's engagement in the war against Ukraine as a military partner, military partner of Russia in this war. But also, I think let's not forget that, and I mentioned the 𝗔𝗀𝗄𝗍 hitting a dead end, but let's not forget the evolution of the revolution in Iran, because that really forced people in the administration to just take another look, to just, like one of them, they say all the time, how can we go back to the negotiating table when they are shooting 15-year-old girls? So that really, these three elements worked their way together with the Gulf coming out and saying, all the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and others, showed a lot of independence, saying that I don't want to be a pawn in your geopolitical competitions. Then the answer comes from Washington, well, you know what, of course we understand it's not now a matter of competition amongst countries, but the competition amongst coalitions, and we would want you to be with us. So that is the message. We are together. The word that you heard in Manama all the time, the word together.
I want to
together. And one last point before it goes away.
I want to go to Joyce.
Just one moment. What the fundamental change right now in terms of the American the administration's view of Iran is impacting, of course, the relationship with the Gulf. One of the aspects is that in the past, 2 months ago, they were saying, well, we will support this revolution, but not regime change. I sense that there is a very serious readiness to support regime change in Tehran, to somehow. And
did it change in the mood, do you think?
No, it's not. It's changed in facts. I just listed the facts.
Yeah, exactly.
I just listed them.
But there's something I really want to mention. I need to know, what did it play? So sorry, Hussein, but there's something I'd like to address here. I just want to know if it had any impact about what we are saying right now, the midterm election, the results of the midterm election.
Yes.
Did it play any impact?
Yes.
Okay, I want to hear from Joyce, and then I want to hear this from Joyce and come back to you. I want to give her the parole to speak.
No, of course. And I just want to point out that we're not necessarily seeing a new groundbreaking dynamic between Saudi Arabia and the United States of America. Those two countries have always had disagreements. I mean, go back to the
Obama days.
And what the Saudi officials expected from Washington then and was not met is somehow similar to today. We go to 1973 and the embargo then. We go to the Iraq war that Saudi Arabia actually opposed to the Arab Spring. Disagreements are not new. So I don't necessarily agree that there is somehow a new atmosphere in the GCC. This is the geopolitics of the relation has always been challenging on some issues, but every time they go back to the basics.
Yeah.
And these two countries need each other and have to work with each other for their own interests. The questions that we hear in Washington are around China's defense relations with, different Gulf countries. And what we're waiting to see in December is if President Xi visits Saudi Arabia.
When he visits, yeah.
Let me
Hussein,
He will visit. Yes, go on. Not if he will visit.
It's something that
Hussein, and now we see.
خلينا
Yes, and also we see the interior minister of. Take my place.
No, but I wanted to hear what she has to say on China.
No, okay, go ahead. Okay, go ahead, Joyce.
I think the defense relationship is something that comes up in private and other conversations with Gulf officials. Now, to your question on the midterms, of course. I mean, it's just a realization that U.S. domestic politics is not something that could be, it's highly unpredictable, and it's not something you can bet on in shortening your foreign policy. And what we see with this Congress is very much of a continuity, especially in the Senate, of what we saw in the last one. And it's, in my opinion, it was a boost for Joe Biden to at least keep that majority, but not, of course, losing the House. And we'll see all kind of investigations, including Afghanistan and other issues, the laptop. And
Hussein, but let me ask you this: moving forward, because there's a lot of developments happened the past week. Shaking hands, Erdogan with the 𝗧cie at the World Cup. The Interior Minister of Turkey is visiting the UAE. I'm trying also to see what's happening in the region, because this all impact Lebanon itself, right? So how do you read these developments, this changing in behavior, or maybe...
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, very quickly, first on the midterms, it was a really important boost for U.S.-Saudi relations that the Democrats didn't get clobbered. If the Democrats had lost the Senate and lost badly, the blame game would have started, and the Saudis would have been high on the list, and it would have been really bad. But that didn't happen, and I think that was very, very helpful. Now, as for all this diplomacy, as opposed to confrontation, which is what we've been seeing for the past few years, it's a big opportunity for Lebanon. Because when there's confrontation and conflict in the region, and insofar as Iran continues that, it is a problem for Lebanon, but when there is all of these attempts at reconciliation, and countries are looking at using diplomacy and commerce and investment and soft power and sticky power, which is money, to pursue their interests rather than through war, directly or indirectly, I think it's a very big opportunity for Lebanon, because it gives the Lebanese a chance to maneuver, a chance to be a conduit between different countries, a chance to play a more positive role. I think without this mood, this generalized mood, the maritime border agreement with Israel will not have happened. And so I think it gives Lebanon a real opportunity to get other countries to engage and invest, and hopefully, try to use Lebanon to advance their interests through investments and aid and development and infrastructure.
Thank you, Hussein. Firas, I have a question for you. Qatar is investing so much money in Lebanon. They are part of the exploring oil and gas after the maritime border. I just want you to give me a sense why Qatar is leading all these big investments in Lebanon. Is it by the collaboration or the permission of its allies, Gulf countries, or Qatar decided to take the lead in this?
Who's that question for?
Firas.
I think it's addressed to me, but I'd like to very quickly, before that, comment on some of the interesting things that Hussein said. I mean, I do agree with him in the general premise that the process of de-escalation, which we've been seeing in the region in the last couple of years, can be conducive for greater stability in Lebanon and more prosperous Lebanon if the Lebanese know how to take advantage of it. So far, we've seen no sign on the Lebanese side of being able to get their act together, whether it's on the political side of things or on the financial side of things, the IMF recommended reforms or whatnot. So, probably a lost opportunity rather than a meaningful one for Lebanon. The second point I would make very quickly is that while this de-escalation has been taking place on one front, I mean, there are at least sort of two cleavages that were playing out post the Arab Spring in the Middle East. One was the Turkey or Muslim Brotherhood versus the Gulf divide, and the other one had to do with Iran. And so while we're seeing de-escalation on the Turkey side, most recently exemplified by that handshake between President 𝗧ci and President Erdogan in Qatar, we're not necessarily seeing that, or we did see that for a period with Iran, but again, as Raghida pointed out, right now things are heating up.
Raghida, do you agree with Firas when he's saying the escalation in the region?
Let him finish.
I do want to answer your question, Alan, in relation to Qatar. Listen, the Qataris are, if I mentioned where the Saudis are in terms of no longer wanting to be that client state, quote unquote, that takes the phone calls from the US and does whatever is being asked over the phone from Washington, Qatar is still happy to play that role. Yeah. Qatar wants to play the role where it is a door opener for Washington in the region where it's helpful. So, if the U.S. promises the Lebanese armed forces, the LAF, $60 million in salary assistance, but can't get it through the bureaucracy here in Washington, the phone call goes into Qatar, and Qatar is happy to make that $60 million available for the LAF. I think it's a combination of that, and the Qataris really know they've mastered inserting themselves in places where they can then exert leverage in the future, and they always play a leading role in natural.
Firas, I want to go back to Lebanon. There's a big event that is taking place in Lebanon, the presidential election that is not really working out lately.
Yeah, we know why. We know why they're not, because there is an irresponsible majority in the parliament that is exercising their duties in the most unethical way, and that's because we have the Speaker of the Parliament who thinks that he has the key, he owns the key to opening it up and and closing it whenever he wants. The fact of the matter is that there has been no serious attempt at an election of the president because of the way that it's been conducted. I don't want to bore you with the details, you know them, but I think the Patriarch, the Cardinal, has really been on the money when he criticized the way it's going on. And when he suggested that, stay there, vote, and then get it done. It's as simple as that. The question would be then, why, for example, whether Mr. Macron, why Mr. Macron right now or will Mr. Macron right now with Mr. Biden just decide to pressure the Speaker of the Parliament, not only the sort of the usual actors. We need to have an election. An election is done in the parliament. A parliament has got to conduct an election without any excuse to just go back to sort of, it's a game. Now, who wants whom? And who's going to become president? I think this game of burning others, burning names, and let's just see. I don't think. Okay, I'll be very honest. all this what I'm hearing about a Saudi agreement and everybody's agreement is that Mr. 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝗏, of course they do.
Okay,
I'm giving you the scoop. I'm giving you the scoop. Hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
Just listen.
Because I need to hear the opinions as well on the
Okay, I can go to the other opinions.
Finish.
خلاص.
No, Raghida, finish. I want to hear the opinion as well. Please go ahead.
Mr. 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝗏.
Mrs. Dargham.
Yes. What I was saying is that you hear a lot of noise about, for example, let's just say as an example, that about Mr. 𝗓𝗏𝗄𝗏 becoming the choice of everybody. Just because, you know, these parties would say, well, we don't mind and we don't block him, but it doesn't mean that they want him. My information is that he's not the Saudi choice. If you understand how to read the Saudi language, that means they really don't want to support him. That means that's not a veto, but they won't have it. They won't deal with him if he is the president. Therefore, this figures its way into the equation.
Involved.
Now, if you are, if you're studying who says what, when, you will be concluding logically that the only logical president to be who meets the agreement of everybody, the consent of everybody, is General Joseph Aoun. Okay, so if you have General Joseph Aoun eventually as the man that meets the consensus of the outside players, probably the inside ones eventually, then you have to think of what happens in the parliament. Because the parliament can't stay under Mr. 𝗓𝗏𝗶𝗏 forever. The man is of an age where he needs to retire at one point.
That's the only reason why.
Yeah, right, and he needs to retire. But then you hear that on the long run, we would have, and you've heard it, that we have names like 𝗷𝗶𝗏 𝗏𝗏𝗏, who also makes a lot of sense because he's got excellent relations with the outside, with the world outside of Lebanon and with the players inside of Lebanon. Then that leaves us with the prime minister. Who is going to be the prime minister? This is where the big problem is, because
he with the Saudi could probably have
a new face, Allah. Probably this is where maybe the surprise,
maybe
this is where the surprise might come in, because the traditional faces are not there. I'm finished talking about Lebanon. Go ahead.
Okay, Joyce, I would like to hear you talking about Lebanon and the presidential election. So it's obvious that there's some irresponsible players in our political game here, not taking the real action to make this happen, because we know why. They're not even having matured the choice yet from the 8th of March, at least the 14th of March, what's called the 14th of March. They have at least called a person, but sadly he didn't meet the rules of the constitution. So what's your take on that? Do you think the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and all these Gulf players are trying to be involved in this election somehow?
I'm not sure I know what they're thinking on this file. I would leave it to 𝗷𝗶𝗏𝗏𝗏. Maybe they have better information. My sense is everybody is in a wait and see mode right now, and everybody is in a who blinks first kind of competition. Let's not kid each other. The most powerful bloc now in the parliament is still Hezbollah's, and it depends.
So the president is made in Lebanon, or made in Saudi Arabia, or made in the US, or made in Iran?
In the past, we've seen, the Lebanese president is made everywhere. It's sort of this global branding that, the major capitals would have to be at least okay with working, including with the last president, Michel Aoun, that they would be okay with it. In the past, we've seen that the Americans have actually flirted with having 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏, that was almost 10 years ago, as president. I'm not sure this is the case now. I think the expectation here in Washington is let's see how the void plays out, and how will who will emerge, as 𝗷𝗶𝗏𝗏 said, as the consensus candidate. The most important part of this puzzle is who will meet the benchmarks that the international community is looking for when it comes to reforms related, to the IMF loan, when it comes to upholding,
so many challenges.
Headline security, regional posture. I think this is more important for them than the name of that person. And what Ragida pointed out is very important. Who will be the next Speaker of the House, the Prime Minister. So we'll probably be looking at medium-term void, unfortunately, that will make the situation even worse economically in Lebanon and for the average person.
But the economy is deteriorating day after day, and this government is not active. There's so many problems. I want to ask Hussein, the Saudis had a clear view about the presidential election. They said if the Lebanese people don't know how to elect a president that could save them from this struggle, and they want to elect someone who is similar to their past president, that's their problem, not our problem anymore. So basically they're saying, if you have the same choice somehow, we're not going to help, we're not going to be involved, we just want to watch you, and your faith is going to be similar to the past one. What's your take on that?
I think the main message from the Saudis has been, we can't do that much for you until you have a president. Been very clear on that. Now the subtext is, obviously, don't give us someone we can't work with. So I completely agree with what Ragida was saying. I think they're...
I wish I can find some disagreement here in this panel, because I'm trying to play that role. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, no, I was just going to say, I think there are some people who the outside world, the Saudis and the Americans, can live with, not love, but live with, both as president and prime minister, and then clearly they've made it known that there are those they don't want. And I think someone like 𝗔𝗀𝗶 would be very problematic, both for Washington and for this. So
and if I could chime in on this.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, the making of a president in Lebanon has always been the result of the local, the regional, and the international coming together. It's like a jigsaw puzzle that has to come together. And, yes, you need to only look at the tripartite statement put forward in September by the Saudis, the French, and the Americans about what would constitute a good president for Lebanon to understand sort of where their mind is. They are looking for somebody, as the statement said, that is acceptable to all Lebanese, but which would also adhere to international resolutions and UN resolutions, including 1559 and 1701. So, I cannot but also agree with that idea that kind of all has the hallmarks and traits of the commander.
Since we are getting closer to the end, I
would say there's a difference between sort of understanding what this president or what this candidate would look like, what the attributes are, and then getting to the stage where the regional, the international, and the local has matured enough to allow for the election of that person. And that clearly hasn't happened. We're not there yet. Lebanon is not a priority given all that's happening in the world, let alone this war in Europe and the confrontation with China, not a priority for the U.S. administration, not a priority for Saudi and MBS, maybe a bit more so for the French. And so the French continue to carry the water and try to push this ball forward, but it's not past the finish line. The only last thing I would say, if you allow me very quickly, is that, and I put this question to my conversations with French officials, there's been plenty of talk about a package deal, the need for a package deal. And again, Ragida touched on that. What are we going to do with the replacing the LAF commander? Anyway, who right now is close to retirement age. What are we going to do with the central bank governor, 𝗹𝗶𝗱? Who are we going to agree to as prime minister? And so there's this sense that what Lebanon really needs right now is a package deal.
But Firas, despite what happened with Lebanon the past 3 years, there is no change in behavior. So they are continuously acting like nothing happened in this country.
Except that there was something very important that happened in this country. And you're right when it comes to the behavior of the politicians and the so-called leaders. And I say so-called on purpose because I'm very angry with the majority. But something did happen, and it is a precedent when you have the demarcation of the maritime borders between two countries who do not recognize each other, and yet there is this agreement. That is something fundamentally huge that happened. Now we can analyze this and we can say on one hand that this is right now the security that there will be no direct war between Hezbollah and Israel because they both have the profitable agreement. Sometimes
but you
the
mentioned in
profitable
your article
yes.
that could be an escalation from Iran.
Indeed.
They won't use Hezbollah part of this escalation.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. In that case, the profitable agreement will somehow supersede the other considerations, particularly that Lebanon and Hezbollah, in case there is that big confrontation, they would want to leave it, at least as I'm told by people who know better than me, for the sort of the deal thereafter. Yani what I'm trying to say to you is that Hamas in Gaza is right now nominated by the Iranians to be the partner if there is going to be an engagement, military engagement with Israel. But I asked about whether Hezbollah will be an engaged factor. And I was told not necessarily, there's no need, because at least they're trying to give the impression that Iran is so advanced with its drones, with its missiles,
no need of Hezbollah.
and that no need right now to engage Hezbollah, because that is something that they would need probably for later negotiations, plus the profitable agreement. Don't forget that this, from my point of view and others, this probably meant de facto challenging the very notion of resistance that Hezbollah upholds, because it's 1701 plus, it's multiplied by 10. Yes. So then in that case, we have to ask ourselves. So on one hand, there is a neutralization of the Lebanese-Israeli borders because of this demarcation agreement. On the other hand, we have the dynamics of the relationship between Israel and Iran. That, again, we cannot secure that it's not going to impact Lebanon, no matter what they try to say. So I want to say that, yes, there is the outside players, the outside elements, but you're right, Alan. The most important one, the challenge, is the performance of the self-appointed guardians of this country, and they need to be challenged, and that's not happening yet.
Okay, so we're going to get a recommendation starting by Joyce. What do you recommend the Lebanese government to do if they want to establish a good relationship with the Arab Gulf countries?
This government or a future?
In general, future government. I mean, maybe we won't have a future government anytime soon. Let's say Mikati government or the future government, any government.
I mean, there has to be a restart in the relationship. There has to be, from both sides, to look at the issues at hand. It's not just Hezbollah, and it's not just Hezbollah's presence in Yemen. It's other issues that has sort of choked that relationship in the last 20 years. The level of investment that Lebanon is looking from Saudi, and but most importantly, it remains regional security, I guess. So what Lebanon can offer to Saudi Arabia on that level, because I don't think we will see real Saudi engagement in Lebanon absent of tangibles and real deliverables from whoever is the next prime minister, he or she, or the president, or whoever takes power in the country. So this is, the Americans have asked Saudi over and over to engage. And there has been few actions, few statements here and there, but the real restart on the relationship has not happened, and that needs deliverables. I'm pretty sure, Prime Minister Mikati knows what the Saudi demands are. Others in the government do too, but Beirut deliver? It's really unclear. So,
thank you, Joyce.
Thank you so much for hosting us. This was an excellent panel. Great to see colleagues and be with you hopefully next time in person, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you. Just let's go now to Firas. And if you want to conclude, I'm sure you mentioned many points. How do you conclude a recommendation, again, either for this government or future governments, if they want to re-establish a very proper and trusty relationship with the Gulf countries?
Well, Alan, it's very simple, and I keep hearing it time and again in my discussions in the Gulf. The first thing that Lebanon needs to do is to get its house in order. And you get your house in order by electing a president. Now, as much as some of us, including myself, would like to see a president that clearly respects international and UN resolutions and reinforces state authority, the simple reality in Lebanon is that it's going to have to be a compromised president. And it's going to be a compromised president, hopefully along the lines of somebody who is acceptable to all parties, but also could move the ball forward in terms of restoring relationships with not only just the Arab Gulf countries, which are crucial for Lebanon's economic and financial future, but also with the West, Europeans, and the Americans. We need a prime minister and a cabinet of able experts that is able to move forward on IMF-recommended reforms and unlock the much-needed assistance. And that government needs to have the support of most major parties in Lebanon, because there's going to be a great deal of pain coming down the pipeline. It needs to have the support of major political and social swaths of the Lebanese people.
Yes.
And then ultimately, I would say that only then would you create the conditions for the Gulf to re-engage in Lebanon. It's by no means a guarantee. The Gulf, again, as I mentioned time and again, has its own priorities. Lebanon is not as important as it used to be in those set of priorities, but at least you create the conditions for meaningful re-engagement.
Thank you, Firas from Washington. Stay in Washington. I want to actually jump to a quick question to Mr. Hussein. I want a quick answer and then go to your recommendation. Mr. Hussein, do we see Saudi kind of make a deal with Israel, part of the Abraham Accord, anytime soon? Because it also have a big impact in the future on the relationship with Lebanon and Gulf states and all that.
No, they're not going to do it anytime soon. They get most of what they want already. There are real problems for them. They have an Arab leadership role. They have an Islamic global leadership role. They have brittle domestic politics, and there's no real need for them to do it.
But they have strong ties under the table and a collaboration, especially facing Iran's challenges in the region.
They're not going to do it anytime soon, especially not with this new, very obnoxious, very right-wing Israeli government. No.
Okay, and now a quick recommendation. It could be one sentence.
Okay, I mean, no, I think Firas is right. The Lebanese have to first elect a president and start get the government working again. And then if they're serious in the long run, everything hinges on reforms. They have to start the reform process. This is the catch-22. They don't want to do it, but everything depends on that for the future of the country. And I'll give a recommendation for the Gulf countries. They need to engage with Lebanon with persistence and patience, and understand that it is in their interest to rebuild the Lebanese state and go for long-term goals rather than get discouraged by short-term problems.
Thank you, Hussein. Mrs. Raghida, before recommendation. No,
yes.
Well, this is very interesting
Mr.
conversation.
Yes.
And I like to see you always smiling, especially as you get so much passionate about what you talk about your expertise in this region. Do you have a hope that would be a great relationship between Gulf states and Lebanon
no, of
in the near
course.
future, especially when they elect a president? But also, I want to add something very important. They've all been calling on it. So if Lebanon does the reform, Saudi Arabia will be will have better relation with Lebanon.
Yeah.
Is this only relied on reforms?
Yes. No, it is not only on reforms, but reforms are absolutely essential for the country to be healthy, to be a functional country. I mean, again, you need to also, what we haven't touched on, and we need to just mention quickly, is our neighbor, our other neighbor, Syria. We need to pay attention to what's going on there, because there are certain, again, there's no time to go into it, but we cannot forget what is going on in Syria, whether it's Turkish incursions, whether it is the Russians giving Iran the upper hand there, whether it is Israeli, where we see the Israeli-Iranian relationship manifests itself, whether in confrontation or whether in accommodation. I think will be impacted directly. I think the recommendation I would make is to stay the course in the demarcation of the borders of Lebanon, not only with Israel but also with Syria, so that you can stop the smuggling, you can stop the sort of milking the Lebanese people and their economy so that through the smuggling. So that's a very functional recommendation I would make. Again, of course, I agree with electing the president, but I think president of the parliament, and the prime minister. That's three. Because I think it's time to think, instead of one preempting the other or waiting for the other or what do you say? يعني عم بيشل, what is it? Paralyzing the other, because we have seen this game going on. I think maybe the right approach is to have that package deal. And for change, I would not agree with Firas, because most of the time I agree with Firas. I don't like the idea of let's wait for a president who meets everybody's consent. What's the word he used? يعني توافقي. I think, what did he use the word? Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think vote to get a president. We're not going to expect a confrontational president, but go for the process of voting rather than reaching arrangements behind the scenes.
Agreement before voting.
تسوية.
But this has been the case.
That's enough. But that's wrong. Change that course. Exactly. Change that course. Act responsibly. The country is in a disastrous situation. It's time to really function as one claims, instead of playing the constitutional game. Play by the constitution.
Well, there's so many greedy players that they won't get.
Oh yes, that there is.
Raghid Dargham from Beirut, 𝗧cie𝗄𝗶𝗄 and Firas Maqsad and 𝗧cie𝘄𝗿𝗶𝗁 from Washington DC. Thanks for joining this panel. It was very constructive and very interesting.
Come back to Beirut. Come back to Beirut.
We want to thank the MCF Media Institute and the Public Affairs section at the U.S. Embassy for organizing this project. Good evening.